The first sensation was a lie. After an eternity defined by its absence, the pinprick of light against the canvas of absolute nothing was a blasphemy, a fiction the mind conjured in its final, desperate unraveling. Kalen had known many such fictions. He had imagined Lyra's face, sculpted from the memory of silver moonlight on her hair, her eyes the color of a twilight sky. He had conjured the scent of rain on the ancient stones of their citadel, the taste of blood and wine, the weight of his crown. For centuries, these phantoms were his only companions in the void, a prison not of walls but of total negation. There was no up or down, no hot or cold, no sound, no light, no time. There was only Kalen, suspended in the silent, suffocating truth of his own consciousness. He had been cast here by the Covenant, a council of his peers, for a crime of mercy. He had refused to purge a human village that had given sanctuary to one of their own, a fledgling hunted for a minor transgression. To Kalen, the punishment demanded was a butchery, not a judgment. To the Covenant, his refusal was sacrilege. And so, the void. He had held on to his sanity with a single, repeating thought, a mantra that became the scaffolding of his existence, for Lyra. I endure for Lyra. Her name was the only texture in the seamless emptiness. But this new sensation was not a phantom. The light did not fade when he focused his non-existent gaze upon it. It grew, a nascent star birthing itself in the heart of oblivion. With the light came the second lie, sound. It was a hum, a low thrumming that vibrated through the very essence of his being. After uncounted cycles of silence, the sound was a physical blow, an agony that was almost exquisite. It was the sound of reality tearing, of a lock being turned. He felt a pull, a gentle but inexorable tide drawing him toward the burgeoning light. The void resisted. The nothingness that had been his keeper for so long clung to him, a jealous shroud unwilling to release its prize. It had fed on his despair, on his isolation, and it did not wish to starve. Kalen fought back, not with the physical strength he no longer possessed, but with the raw, incandescent power of his will, a will honed to a razor's edge by centuries of solitary defiance. He focused on the light, on the hum. He poured every ounce of his being, every remembered detail of Lyra's smile, into the act of moving toward it. It was like swimming through setting stone. The pressure was immense, a crushing weight of non-existence. He felt his consciousness fraying, the edges of his identity blurring into the featureless gray. But the light was a promise. The hum was a song of escape. Then he saw it, coalescing within the heart of the light. A key. Not of iron or brass, but of woven starlight and solidified sound. It pulsed with a power that felt both alien and achingly familiar. It was a key forged of immense sacrifice, he knew that instinctively. A price had been paid, a terrible, world-altering price, to manifest this impossibility in a realm defined by its lack of possibility. The key drifted toward him, and as it touched the place where his chest would be, the universe broke. The hum became a deafening roar. The light exploded into a supernova, washing away the void in a tidal wave of pure sensation. Colors he had forgotten the names for crashed over him, crimson, cerulean, emerald. The scent of ozone and wet earth filled his incorporeal lungs. The feeling of wind, of gravity, of his own form reasserting itself, was a symphony of glorious pain. He was falling, tumbling through a vortex of fractured realities, a kaleidoscope of starfields and storm clouds. The transition was a violent birth, expelling him from the sterile womb of the void and into the chaotic, vibrant crush of the living world. He landed, not with a crash, but with the silent grace of a predator, his bare feet sinking into damp soil. The void was gone. Above him, a bruised purple sky was filled with unfamiliar constellations. The air was cold, sharp, and blessedly real. He was free. And only one name, one purpose, echoed in the renewed silence of his mind. Lyra. The forest floor was a riot of sensation. Damp moss squelched beneath his bare feet, the scent of pine and decay a heady perfume after the sterile nothingness of his prison. Kalen drew in a deep breath, the simple act a luxury he hadn't known he missed. His body felt alien, a borrowed vessel. The void had stripped him down to pure consciousness, and the re-inhabitation was a clumsy, disorienting affair. He flexed his fingers, watching as pale skin stretched over fine-boned knuckles. He was gaunt, his form a wraith-like echo of the king he had been, but the power was still there, slumbering in his blood, a coiled serpent waiting for the call. It stirred now, a low thrum of hunger, a desperate need to replenish the centuries of starvation. He ignored it. That could wait. Nothing could wait but her. He closed his eyes, extending a sense that had been dormant for ages, casting out a thread of awareness into the world, searching for the one resonant frequency that had been the anchor of his soul. He found it almost instantly, a faint but steady beacon of light in the distance, a familiar signature of grace and power. Lyra. She was there. She was alive. A wave of relief so profound it was physically painful washed over him, making him stagger. He had held on to hope like a dying man's prayer, but to have it answered, to feel her presence in the world again, was to be resurrected. He began to move, his initial awkwardness melting away with each stride. The preternatural speed and silence returned to him, muscle and sinew remembering their ancient purpose. He flowed through the darkened woods, a ghost in the moonlight, the world a blur of greens and browns around him. The landscape was wrong. The trees were too young, the paths too wide. A paved road, a concept that had been a provincial novelty when he was imprisoned, cut through the heart of what had been his royal hunting grounds. The air tasted different, tainted with the unfamiliar tang of smoke and industry. How long had he been gone? The Covenant had promised him an eternity, but time, he knew, was a fluid thing. For him, it had been a measureless torment. For the world, it had clearly marched on. He felt a pang of dislocation, a stranger in his own lands. But the feeling was swiftly consumed by the singular focus of his journey. The beacon of Lyra's presence grew stronger, a warm, golden light pulling him onward. It was the same, yet different. There was a faint, discordant hum beneath the surface, a subtle dissonance that pricked at his senses. He dismissed it as a lingering effect of the void, a distortion in his newly awakened perception. Nothing could be wrong. Not now. His citadel rose from the valley ahead, its familiar silhouette a dagger against the bruised dawn sky. The black spire of Antheus, his seat of power, a fortress carved from the heart of a mountain by his ancestors. It stood unchanged, a monument of defiance against the erosion of time. Relief warred with a growing unease. The wards, the intricate web of protective magics he had woven around the castle, were still in place. He could feel them, singing softly in the language of blood and intent. But they felt thin. Frayed, like a tapestry left in the sun for too long. And the lands around his fortress were quieter than he remembered. The sprawling domain that had once teemed with his subjects, the vibrant society of the night, seemed diminished, its energy muted. He pushed the thoughts aside. He was projecting his own weariness onto the world. Once he held Lyra, once he was whole again, he would restore it all. He would be king again. He reached the great outer gate, a monstrous portcullis of obsidian and iron. It was closed, barred. In ages past, it would have flown open at his mere approach. Now, it remained shut, a silent, imposing denial. A flicker of irritation, the first spark of his old arrogance, ignited within him. He did not bother with the gate. He placed a hand on the cold, sheer stone of the 30-foot wall beside it, and let the shadows claim him. He poured himself into the stone, becoming one with its darkness, and flowed upward, rematerializing on the battlements in a whisper of displaced air. The courtyard was empty. No guards, no servants hurrying on silent feet. The silence was heavy, unnatural. The air was thick with the scent of dust and something else, something cloyingly sweet and sterile, like dried flowers and regret. He moved through the cavernous halls of his home, his steps making no sound on the polished marble floors. Everything was as he remembered it, yet utterly wrong. The tapestries depicting the history of his line were faded. A film of dust coated the suits of ceremonial armor that lined the grand hall. It was a castle preserved, not lived in. A museum of a life that had ended centuries ago. His heart, a long-dormant organ that served more as a vessel for emotion than a biological necessity, began a slow, heavy beat against his ribs. The dissonance he had sensed in Lyra's aura was stronger now, a sharp, painful vibration that resonated deep in his bones. He found her in the solar, the one room that caught the first rays of the rising sun, a place she had always loved for its defiant embrace of the light. She was standing by the great arched window, her back to him, gazing out at the pale, anemic dawn. She wore a simple gown of deep blue, and her silver hair was bound in an elegant but severe knot at the nape of her neck. She was as beautiful as the phantom he had clung to in the dark. She was perfect. "Lyra," he breathed, his voice a raw, cracked thing. She turned, and the world stopped. She looked at him, and Kaelin's universe, so recently reborn, shattered into a million pieces. There was no shock of reunion in her eyes, no joyous disbelief, no flood of love and relief. There was only politeness. A calm, mild curiosity, the kind one might afford a stranger who had unexpectedly appeared in their private chambers. Her twilight eyes, the eyes he had dreamed of for centuries, scanned his gaunt face, his tattered remnants of clothing, his bare feet on her priceless carpets. She took in the sight of him, a wraith returned from oblivion, and offered a small, hesitant smile that did not reach her eyes. "You have me at a disadvantage," she said, her voice the same melodic chime he remembered, yet stripped of all its warmth. It was a courtly phrase, a formal pleasantry. It was a knife in his chest. "My lord." He could not speak. The name, his name, was not in her voice. The shared soul that had bound them for a millennium was absent from her gaze. He took a stumbling step forward, his hand outstretched, a desperate, silent plea. "Lyra, it is I." It is Kaelin. He watched her face for the flicker of recognition, the spark of memory that had to be there. It was their bond, an oath sworn in blood and magic, older than mountains. It could not simply be gone. "Kaelin," she repeated, tasting the name as if it were a foreign word. "The first king." The one lost to the void. She inclined her head, a gesture of deference to a historical figure, not the passionate bow of a lover to her returning heart. The legends spoke truly, then. "You have returned." A miracle. The word miracle was delivered with the emotional weight of a weather report. She was looking at a ghost from a history book, not the other half of her soul. The coldness of it was more absolute than the void had ever been. "Legends," he choked out, the word scraping his throat raw. "Lyra, what are you saying? Look at me." It is me. He reached for her, his fingers trembling, needing to feel her, to bridge this impossible chasm that had opened between them. She took a half-step back, a subtle, reflexive motion of avoidance. It was not born of fear, but of propriety. A queen does not allow an unfamiliar man to touch her. The movement, small as it was, broke him. "Do you not know me?" he whispered, the question a shard of ice in his own heart. She met his gaze, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of something beyond placid courtesy. It was confusion, a deep and unsettling uncertainty. "I know your face," she said slowly, her brow furrowed. "It is the face from the statues in the Great Hall. The face in the royal portraits. I recognize you as King Kaelin. But I do not know you." The devastation was a physical force, a black hole opening in his chest, consuming the light, the air, the very hope that had fueled his escape. This was a prison far crueler than the void. To be here, to see her, to breathe the same air, and to be met with the sterile regard of a stranger, it was a torment beyond comprehension. The fragile control he had maintained since his return began to splinter. The hunger, the rage, the centuries of pent-up agony, all of it began to surge. "A statue," he snarled, the sound less human than animal. "A portrait. That is all I am to you." His voice rose, echoing in the vast, silent room. "After everything, the vows we made, the centuries we shared, you look at me and see a piece of history?" He advanced on her, the silent grace gone, replaced by the heavy, menacing tread of a predator. He saw her composure finally crack, a flicker of genuine fear in her eyes now. Good. Let her feel something. Anything was better than this placid emptiness. "What have you done?" he roared, his voice cracking with a grief so immense it was indistinguishable from fury. "Is this some game? Some cruel jest to punish me for my absence?" He gestured wildly around the dusty, preserved room. "To leave our home a mausoleum? To greet me as if I were a spectre from a forgotten age? This is not you, Lyra. The woman I love would have torn the world apart to find me, not, not forgotten me. The accusation, hot and venomous, hung in the air between them. Her face went pale, the flicker of fear replaced by a flash of defiance, a glimpse of the queen she was. I do not know what you speak of, she said, her voice tight, but you are a stranger in my home. You will not speak to me in that tone. Her denial, so calm, so absolute, was the final spark on the dry tinder of his sanity. Cruelty. It had to be a deliberate, calculated cruelty. She had moved on. In the centuries he was gone, she had found a way to sever their bond, to erase him, to live her life unburdened by his memory. The thought was a poison, swift and lethal. A stranger, he laughed, a bitter, broken sound. I am the architect of your soul, Lyra. I am the reason your heart beats. And you call me a stranger. He was shouting now, the raw power in his voice making the very stones of the castle tremble. Dust motes danced in the pale morning light. You are a liar, a cold, heartless creature who let our love turn to dust. As the final, terrible words left his lips, something happened. A faint, crimson light bloomed on the pale skin of her throat, just below her ear. He saw her flinch, a sharp intake of breath, her hand flying to the spot as if to cover it. But he had seen it. A sigil, an intricate, spiraling mark, burning itself onto her flesh like a brand. It glowed with a malevolent, parasitic energy, a foul magic he recognized with a sickening lurch of his stomach. It was the mark of a soul merchant. A brand of ownership. A slave's sigil. The rage that had been a chaotic storm inside him instantly coalesced, focusing into a single, terrifying point of white-hot fury. The confusion, the grief, the heartbreak, it all vanished, burned away by a singular, clarifying purpose. He had been a fool. This was not her cruelty. This was not her choice. She hadn't forgotten him. Her memory, their bond, their love, it had been stolen. He looked from the fading, angry mark on her skin to her wide, confused, and now pain-filled eyes. She didn't understand what was happening. She didn't know what she had lost, or what had been done to her. She was a victim, shackled by a magic so vile it was forbidden even by the most depraved sorcerers. He had accused her, wounded her, when she was the one who was truly imprisoned. The realization was a second, sharper agony. The merchant, he whispered, the name tasting like ash and corruption in his mouth. His eyes, which had been wide with pain, narrowed into slits of deadly intent. The power that had been slumbering within him, the ancient, terrible strength of a vampire king, erupted. The air in the room grew heavy, cold. Shadows deepened in the corners, stretching toward him like supplicants. He was no longer a gaunt, heartbroken wraith. He was a sovereign, an executioner, a force of nature about to be unleashed. He looked at Lyra one last time, his heart aching with a love that was now intertwined with a murderous rage. I will unmake the one who did this to you, he vowed, his voice a low, terrifying promise. And then he was gone, turning his back on his forgotten love and launching himself into the dawn, a missile of pure, righteous vengeance. The sun, his ancient enemy, held no terror for him now. There were far worse things in the world than burning. The pale light of the morning sun was a physical irritant against his skin, a weak but persistent sting that spoke of his long confinement and depleted vitality. In his prime, he could walk in daylight for hours, an act of supreme power and defiance. Now, it was a nuisance, a reminder of his current weakness. But it did not slow him. Rage was a fuel more potent than blood. He moved through the castle's silent corridors, a storm of focused fury. His target was singular, the soul merchant. The name itself was a vulgarity, a term for the bottom feeders of the supernatural world, traffickers in the most sacred of currencies. That one would dare to lay a claim on his queen, on Lyra, was a sacrilege that would be answered with utter annihilation. As he reached the main doors, a figure emerged from the shadows of the grand hall. It was Lorien, the Castellan of Antheus, his face a mask of aged parchment, his eyes holding the weary wisdom of his 7 centuries of service. He was one of the few who remained, a pillar of loyalty in a house of ghosts. He bowed low, a gesture of profound respect that warmed a minuscule corner of Kaelin's frozen heart. My king, Lorien's voice was raspy with disuse and emotion. I knew the wards felt different. I knew you had returned. Lorien, Kalen acknowledged, his voice tight, clipped. There was no time for reunions. The soul merchant. Where do I find them? Lorian's ancient eyes widened, a flicker of fear crossing his stoic features. My lord, you have only just returned. You are not at your full strength. The merchant. Where? Kalen repeated, his voice dropping to a low growl that made the old vampire flinch. The shadows in the hall deepened, coiling around Kalen's feet like loyal hounds. Lorian swallowed, the sound loud in the oppressive silence. Their nexus is in the Undercity, in what was once the artisans' district. They call it the Emporium. A place of grim commerce. But, my king, to go there now, the merchant is not some petty soulbroker. They have become a power in your absence. They feed on desperation, and these last centuries have been desperate times. Kalen's jaw tightened. He could see it in Lorian's eyes, the long, slow decay of his kingdom. The despair of a people whose sovereign had vanished. It was into that vacuum of hope that a creature like the soul merchant would have slithered. He preys on my people. The question was soft, but laced with deadly promise. Lorian nodded grimly. They offer bargains. Power for servitude. Wealth for a piece of one's soul. Hope for a price none can truly afford. Many have fallen into their debt. He paused, his gaze filled with a terrible sadness. The queen, she was desperate, my king. For centuries, she sought every seer, every oracle, every forbidden text to find a way to breach the void. She exhausted her power, her resources, her hope. The merchant was her last resort. The Castellan's words were like hammer blows, each one forging Kalen's rage into a sharper, more perfect weapon. Lyra had not given up. She had fought for him. She had fought until she had nothing left to give, and then she had gone to the one who could take more. The thought of her, proud and powerful, humbling herself before a vile merchant, bargaining for his freedom, filled him with a fresh wave of agony and fury. She did this for me, he whispered, the truth of it settling in his soul like a lead weight. The price, Lorian said, his voice barely audible. What was the price? Kalen didn't answer. He couldn't. He just looked at his old friend, his eyes burning with a resolve that was absolute. Ready my armor. And my blade. Lorian hesitated for only a second. You will not go alone. I will, Kalen stated, his tone leaving no room for argument. This is not a battle. It is an execution. And it is mine to deliver. He swept past the Castellan and out of the great doors, into the weak sunlight. The Undercity was a scar on the face of his domain, a sprawling, chaotic network of tunnels and chambers beneath the pristine upper city. In his time, it was a place of tradesmen and artisans. Now, as he descended into its depths, the air grew thick with the stench of poverty, desperation, and corrupt magic. The architecture was a twisted mockery of the elegant structures above, a labyrinth of black market stalls and hidden dens. Beings of all kinds, gaunt vampires, furtive humans, hunched goblins scurried through the gloom, their eyes downcast, their shoulders stooped with the weight of bad bargains. He could feel the merchant's power here, a greasy, cloying presence that coated every surface. It was a web, and these poor souls were the flies caught within it. His presence did not go unnoticed. As he walked through the main thoroughfare, a path of silence cleared before him. The denizens of the Undercity, their senses honed by fear and survival, recognized the power radiating from him, the sheer, ancient authority that clung to him like a shroud. They saw the fury in his eyes and melted back into the shadows, their whispers following him like the rustle of dry leaves. The old king. He has returned. The Emporium was not hard to find. It was the black heart of the Undercity, a fortress of tarnished brass and black marble that seemed to suck the very light from the air. The entrance was a grand, gaping archway, unguarded. It needed no guards. The fear it inspired was protection enough. A sign, written in flickering, spectral letters, hung above the arch. The Emporium, all debts honored, all desires weighed. Kalen didn't slow his stride. He passed through the archway, and the temperature dropped 20 degrees. The sounds of the Undercity faded away, replaced by a profound, humming silence, punctuated by the faint, disembodied whispers of 1,000 traded memories. He had left the world of the living and entered a library of stolen souls. The interior of the emporium was a vast, cathedral-like space, far larger than its external structure suggested. The air hummed with contained power, a suffocating pressure that would have brought a lesser being to their knees. Towering shelves stretched up into an abyss of darkness, each one lined not with books, but with glowing orbs of every size and color. Some pulsed with a fiery orange light, containing stolen rage or ambition. Others wept a soft, sorrowful blue, filled with grief. There were orbs of brilliant gold, shimmering with joy, and orbs of murky green, swirling with envy. It was a collection of lives, a gallery of emotions, all neatly categorized and priced. In the center of the grand chamber, on a dais of polished jet, sat a throne. And on that throne, a figure lounged, observing his entrance with an air of detached amusement. The soul merchant was not the grotesque monster Kaelin had imagined. They were androgynous, elegant, clad in silks the color of a starless midnight. Their face was a mask of serene, ageless beauty, their eyes the color of old gold, ancient and utterly devoid of empathy. They held a crystalline goblet in one long-fingered hand, swirling a liquid that shimmered with captured starlight. King Kaelin, the merchant's voice was like honey and glass, smooth and sharp at once. Returned from the quiet place. I must confess, I did not expect you so soon. Your mate paid for a key, not a swift passage. Kaelin stopped at the foot of the dais, the whispers of stolen souls curling around his ankles. He met the merchant's golden gaze, his own eyes burning like twin coals. The fury was a physical presence inside him, a cold, controlled inferno. You have taken something from me, he said, his voice dangerously calm. The merchant smiled, a slow, lazy curve of their lips. I have taken nothing, Your Majesty. I am a merchant, not a thief. I facilitate transactions. A fair price for a desired commodity. Your queen was a most motivated customer. They took a delicate sip from their goblet. She came to me, broken with grief, having exhausted all other avenues. She wished for the key to the unseen gate, the one that opens onto the void. A rare item. Very costly. What was the price? Kaelin's voice was a blade in the humming silence. The merchant's smile widened. They gestured with their free hand to the endless shelves of glowing orbs. My currency is not gold, King Kaelin. It is essence. Experience. Memory. The things that give a life its texture, its meaning. The key to your prison required a payment of equal metaphysical weight. A love that had defied centuries. A bond that anchored a soul to the world. The merchant's golden eyes gleamed with a collector's pride. She offered it freely. Every memory she possessed of you. Every touch, every word, every shared glance. The joy, the sorrow, the passion. All of it. Wiped clean from her mind, her very soul, and bottled for my collection. The merchant's words were delivered with the casual air of a connoisseur discussing a fine wine. To Kaelin, they were a death sentence, a confirmation of his deepest horror. He had imagined a curse, a form of magical slavery. The truth was infinitely more profane. Her love had not been stolen, it had been sold. Willingly. For him. The sheer, selfless magnitude of her sacrifice was staggering, a love so profound it would choose self-annihilation for the sake of its object. The fury that had brought him here faltered, replaced by a wave of grief so vast it threatened to drown him. He saw her face in his mind, the polite confusion, the empty eyes. She had hollowed herself out to save him. The merchant watched his reaction with clinical interest. A beautiful tragedy, is it not? The ultimate expression of devotion. To erase the very thing one is devoted to, in order to save it. Poetic, they gestured toward a special alcove, set apart from the others, where a single, luminous orb rested on a velvet pedestal. It glowed with a warm, brilliant light, a miniature sun of pure, untainted love. It pulsed with a gentle, rhythmic beat, the echo of a shared heart. Behold, the merchant said, their voice filled with reverence. The love of a queen for her lost king. My most prized acquisition. Kaelin stared at the orb, and he could feel it. He could feel the echo of their shared millennia, the warmth of her hand in his, the sound of her laughter in a sun-drenched garden, the solemn weight of their blood oath. It was all there, everything she was, everything they had been, trapped in a glass bauble. A new kind of rage began to build within him, colder and deadlier than the fire that had driven him here. It was not the hot fury of a wronged husband, but the icy wrath of a king whose most sacred relic had been defiled. "You," Kaelan said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was more terrifying than any shout, "deal in things you do not comprehend. You mistake a soul for a commodity. You have weighed and measured that which is infinite." The merchant chuckled, a low, patronizing sound. "Oh, I comprehend it perfectly. I comprehend its value. I comprehend its power. And now, it is mine. A fair trade. She has her king, and I have his memory." They leaned forward, their golden eyes glinting with a new, predatory light. "But perhaps we can make another deal, you and I. That orb contains a power you can scarcely imagine. A love that can shatter worlds. I could rent it to you. Allow you to feel it again. For a price, of course. Perhaps a few centuries of service. A king would be a valuable asset." The offer was the final obscenity. The attempt to sell his own love back to him. The sheer, transactional profanity of it snapped the last thread of Kaelan's control. "There will be no more bargains," he growled. The shadows in the room erupted. They surged from the corners, no longer supplicants but extensions of his will, tendrils of living darkness that shot toward the throne. The merchant's eyes widened in genuine surprise as they were thrown backward, their goblet shattering on the jet-black stone. "You will give her back to me," Kaelan commanded, his voice now imbued with the full, resonant power of his ancient lineage. "You will give it all back." The fight was not one of flesh and steel. It was a war of will and shadow, of ancient authority against transactional corruption. The merchant, thrown from their throne, landed with an unnatural grace, their silken robes swirling around them. The amused detachment was gone from their face, replaced by a mask of cold fury. "You are a fool, old king," they hissed, their voice losing its honeyed edge. "You trespass in my domain. You are bound by my rules." With a gesture, the emporium itself came to life. Orbs of stolen emotion flew from the shelves, a swarm of angry, weeping, screaming lights. An orb of pure terror exploded before Kaelan, bathing him in the concentrated fear of 100 mortal lifetimes. He felt the phantom sensation of a blade in his gut, the horror of a child lost in the dark, the despair of a soldier on a losing battlefield. He staggered, the psychic assault overwhelming his senses, which were still raw from the void. The merchant laughed, a sharp, cruel sound. "Everything here is mine. Every joy, every sorrow. And I will use it all to unmake you." They gestured again, and a dozen orbs of concentrated rage, the fury of betrayed lovers, deposed lords, and wronged parents, shot toward him like cannonballs of pure malice. Kaelan roared, a sound of primal defiance. He threw up a hand, and the shadows that coiled around him solidified into a shimmering barrier of darkness. The orbs of rage slammed into it, exploding in silent, incandescent bursts of psychic energy. The impact threw him back a step, the sheer emotional weight of the attack staggering him. But he held. He would not be broken by the ghosts of other people's pain. His own was a universe unto itself. "You think this can stop me," he snarled, pushing back against the onslaught. "I have bathed in absolute nothingness for an age. Your collection of petty agonies is a child's nightmare." He focused his will, drawing on the deepest reserves of his power. His lineage was not one of merchants and tricksters. It was one of warriors and sovereigns, of beings who commanded the fundamental forces of night and fear. He let the shadows flow through him, becoming a conduit for their cold, silent power. His eyes began to glow with a soft, silver light, the color of the moon he had so longed to see. The merchant saw the change and their expression tightened. They raised both hands, and the very structure of the emporium began to groan. The shelves of stolen souls swayed, and the whispers grew to a deafening chorus. Contracts written on human skin flew through the air, their cursed ink glowing as they formed a vortex of binding magic around Kaelan. "You are bound by the covenant that imprisoned you," the merchant shrieked. "You are bound by the laws of magic. I will chain you with them." Kaelan laughed, a cold, humorless sound. "The covenant is a council of cowards. And their laws do not apply to a king in his own, violated lands." He looked at the swirling vortex of contracts, at the glyphs and sigils meant to bind and control. He saw the desperation in them, the foolish belief that a soul could be constrained by ink and parchment. With a contemptuous flick of his wrist, he sent a wave of pure, unrefined shadow into the vortex. The contracts, containing some of the most powerful binding spells ever devised, dissolved into black dust. The merchant cried out as their power was nullified, feedback screaming through their connection to their stolen artifacts. "This is not possible," they stammered, taking a step back. "Your power should be diminished." "My power is fueled by my purpose," Kalen said, advancing slowly, each step shaking the foundations of the Emporium. "And my purpose is you." He no longer needed to lash out with grand gestures of shadow. The power was now a part of him, an aura of absolute authority that bent the reality of the merchant's domain to his will. The glowing orbs on the shelves dimmed, their light flickering as if in fear. The oppressive psychic pressure in the room lessened, replaced by the cold, clean authority of his own presence. He was reclaiming his territory, one step at a time. The merchant, seeing their power failing, grew desperate. They made a grasping motion toward the alcove, toward the glowing orb that contained Lyra's love. "If I cannot have it," they snarled, "no one will." A bolt of black energy, a spell of utter annihilation, shot from their fingertips toward the pedestal. Time seemed to slow. Kalen saw the bolt of unmaking energy arc through the air. He saw the orb, the fragile vessel of everything he was, everything he had ever loved. And he moved. He did not use shadows or magic. He used the raw, physical speed of his ancient bloodline, a speed that broke the sound barrier without a whisper. He crossed the vast chamber in less than a heartbeat, a blur of motion that the merchant's eyes could not even track. He appeared between the bolt and the orb, his back to the precious prize he was shielding. He did not try to block the spell. He simply caught it. The bolt of annihilation slammed into his outstretched palm. The pain was beyond description, a fire that burned not just flesh but soul, a force designed to erase matter and spirit from existence. His hand and forearm were consumed in a silent explosion of black light, disintegrating into nothingness. But he held the spell's focus, his will a dam against its entropic cascade. He gritted his teeth, a low growl of pure agony and effort escaping his lips, as he contained the spell, crushing it in his fist until it winked out of existence. He stood there for a moment, panting, his left arm ending in a cauterized stump just below the elbow. The merchant stared, their face a mask of disbelief and terror. He had caught an unmaking spell. He had held oblivion in his hand and crushed it. He turned his head slowly, his silver-glowing eyes locking onto the terrified merchant. "You have made your last sale," he said, his voice a dead-flat promise of retribution. He raised his remaining hand, and the shadows of the Emporium, now fully under his command, answered their true master. They surged forward, not as tendrils, but as a tidal wave of absolute darkness, and washed over the screaming soul merchant, silencing them forever. The wave of shadows receded, leaving behind nothing but an empty throne and a profound silence. The soul merchant was gone, not killed, but unmade. Dispersed into the very darkness they had sought to command. Kalen stood panting in the center of the vast chamber, the adrenaline of the fight draining away, leaving behind a hollow ache and the searing pain in his ruined arm. He looked down at the stump, at the blackened, cauterized flesh where his hand had been. The wound was already beginning to seal, the phenomenal regenerative abilities of his lineage working to close the wound, but the arm would not regrow on its own. Not without a vast expenditure of power and blood, which he did not have to spare. He ignored the pain. It was a trifle, a flesh wound. The true wound was still weeping in his soul. His gaze fell upon the alcove, upon the single orb that still glowed with a warm, steady light. Lyra's love. He had protected it. He had won. But the victory felt like ashes in his mouth. He walked toward it, his steps heavy, his body screaming with exhaustion and pain. He reached the pedestal and looked down at the glowing sphere. It was about the size of a human heart, and it pulsed with a gentle, rhythmic warmth that he could feel on his skin. Within its luminous depths, he could see faint, swirling images, fractured moments of a shared eternity. He saw a brief, brilliant flash of their first meeting in a moonlit glade, her laughter echoing in a forgotten garden, the solemnity of their bonding ceremony under a sky of falling stars. It was all there. Everything she had sacrificed. He reached out his remaining hand, his fingers trembling, and gently, reverently, he lifted the orb from its velvet cushion. The moment his skin touched its surface, a jolt went through him. It was not an electric shock, but a wave of pure, undiluted emotion. Her love. It flooded his senses, a tidal wave of warmth, devotion, and a sorrow so profound it took his breath away. He felt her desperate search through the centuries, her frustration, her fading hope, and finally, her terrible, resolute decision. He felt the agony of the moment she made the trade, the feeling of her soul being hollowed out, the emptiness that rushed in to fill the space where he had been. It was all contained within the orb, a perfect, tragic record of her sacrifice. He clutched it to his chest, the warmth of it seeping through his tattered shirt, a phantom heat against his cold skin. He bowed his head, and for the first time since his return, a single, hot tear traced a path through the grime on his cheek. The rage was gone, the vengeance was complete, but the grief remained, sharper and more poignant than ever. He had his kingdom to rebuild, a domain to cleanse of the merchant's lingering corruption, and a body to heal. But all of that was secondary. All that mattered was the precious, fragile light he held in his hand. He turned and walked away from the silent throne, his footsteps the only sound in the now inert emporium. The other orbs had all gone dark, their stolen light extinguished with the demise of their master. Their contents, the stolen pieces of 1,000 lives, were slowly, gently, returning to their original owners across the land. He could feel it, a subtle wave of psychic restitution spreading out from the Undercity. Small joys rediscovered, old sorrows finally laid to rest. He had not just saved Lyra, he had liberated countless others from their spiritual debts. But his task was not finished. He left the Emporium, emerging from its dark archway into the gloom of the Undercity. The path cleared before him once more, but this time, the whispers were not of fear, but of awe. They saw the glowing orb he carried, the stump of his arm, the grim resolve on his face. They saw a king who had descended into hell to reclaim what was his. He did not acknowledge them. His focus was singular. He ascended from the depths of the Undercity, back into the clean, cold air of the upper world. The sun was higher now, its rays stronger, but he barely felt their sting. The light of the orb in his hand was a sun of its own, a shield of love against the world's enmity. He crossed the courtyard of his silent castle, his stride now purposeful and sure. He was no longer a vengeful wraith. He was a supplicant, bearing a holy relic. He found her where he had left her, in the solar. She was sitting in a high-backed chair, staring into the cold fireplace, her hands clasped in her lap. The angry red mark of the sigil was still visible on her throat, a faint, ugly brand against her pale skin. She looked up as he entered, her expression a mixture of apprehension and the same unnerving, polite confusion. She saw the state of him, his torn clothes, the blood and grime, the shocking ruin of his left arm. A flicker of something, pity, perhaps, or a healer's concern, crossed her face. "My lord," she said, her voice soft. "You are injured." Kaelin's heart ached at the detached kindness in her voice. He walked slowly toward her, holding the glowing orb before him in his one good hand. Her eyes were drawn to it, to its warm, inviting light. A faint frown of curiosity touched her lips. "What is that?" she asked, her gaze fixed on the shimmering sphere. He did not answer with words. He stopped before her chair and slowly, deliberately, knelt. He, Kaelin, the first king, who had not knelt before anyone or anything in 3 millennia, knelt on the cold stone floor before the woman who did not know him. It was an act of complete and total surrender, an abdication of his pride, his kingship, his very self. He was not a king reclaiming his queen. He was a man begging for his soul. He looked up at her, his eyes pleading, and gently, with infinite care, he lifted the orb and pressed it against her forehead. The moment the orb touched her skin, it dissolved. Not in an explosion, but in a soft, silent implosion of light, a star collapsing into itself. The light did not vanish, it flowed into her, a river of liquid gold pouring directly into her mind. Her body went rigid, her head snapping back against the chair. Her eyes, which had been fixed on his with placid confusion, went wide, the pupils dilating until they were nothing but black pools. A silent scream contorted her features as 1,000 years of memory, a millennium of love and life and shared existence, crashed down upon her in a single, brutal, overwhelming instant. Kaelan watched, his heart in his throat, his one remaining hand hovering near her, wanting to comfort her but afraid to interfere. He could see it happening behind her eyes, a chaotic storm of images and sensations. He saw flashes reflected there, their first kiss under a weeping willow, the birth of their fledgling nation, a bitter argument in the snow, a quiet moment of shared reading by a fire, the terrible, final goodbye as the Covenant dragged him away. He saw her centuries of lonely searching, her consultations with mystics and mags, the crumbling pages of forbidden tomes, the growing desperation in her heart. He saw her standing before the soul merchant, her face a mask of resolute grief as she named her price. He saw her hand over her heart, her soul, her everything, for him. Then, the storm subsided. The rigidity left her body, and she slumped forward, a long, shuddering gasp escaping her lips. Her eyes, no longer wide with shock, fluttered closed. For a terrifying second, Kaelan thought he had broken her, that the sudden influx of a life forgotten was too much for her mind to bear. He reached for her, his breath catching in his throat. Her eyes opened again. They were no longer empty. They were no longer polite or confused. They were the eyes he remembered, the eyes he had held onto in the dark. They were filled with 1,000 years of love, a universe of shared sorrow, and the brilliant, blazing light of recognition. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw not a statue, not a legend, but her Kaelan. Her king. Her love. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, then another. Her lips trembled, trying to form a word, a name that had been absent from her soul for what must have felt like an eternity. Kaelan, she whispered, the name a broken, beautiful prayer. It was not the formal title she had used before. It was his name, spoken with the weight of all they had ever been. It was the sound of a soul finding its other half. It was the sound of his world coming back together. He didn't need any other signal. With a choked sob of his own, he surged forward from his kneeling position, wrapping his one good arm around her, pulling her from the chair and into his embrace. He buried his face in her silver hair, inhaling the scent of her, the familiar fragrance of night-blooming jasmine and home. She clung to him, her arms wrapping fiercely around his neck, her fingers digging into his back as if to assure herself that he was real, solid, and not another phantom of her grief. She wept his name over and over, the sound muffled against his shoulder, each repetition a stitch knitting their sundered souls back together. He held her, simply held her, his own tears falling freely into her hair. The pain in his arm, the exhaustion, the lingering horrors of the void and the fight, it all faded into nothingness, burned away by the overwhelming, incandescent joy of this one moment. She was here. She was whole. She remembered. They sank to the floor together, a tangle of limbs and tears and whispered assurances, unwilling and unable to let go. The pale morning light streamed through the solar window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air around them, bathing them in a soft, forgiving glow. The night was over. The long, lonely dawn had finally broken. They held each other through the turning of the day, two halves of a single soul, reunited and complete, their love proven stronger than any prison, any curse, any sacrifice. The castle was still a mausoleum, the kingdom still in ruins, and the future was an uncertain road shrouded in shadow. But for the first time in centuries, they would walk it together. If you've journeyed this far with Kaelan and Lyra, consider subscribing to the channel. Their story is far from over, and the rebuilding of their world will require more than just love. It will require blood and shadow, and the unyielding will of a king and queen who have already conquered eternity.